A mechanic's fingers found a small crank hidden beneath an Opel GT's hood in 1968, and the light rolled up like something out of tomorrow. Nobody in Germany expected a family brand to build anything this bold. It wasn't just a cadet wearing a costume, it was proof that Rüsselsheim could dream in curves. Critics called it a toy. History disagreed. Today we're uncovering why this coupe deserved far more credit than it ever received, and how a small mechanism inside its lamps still echoes through cars you drive right now. Would you have bought this coupe back then? Erhard Schnell didn't set out to build something rebellious. He just wanted the shape right. Inside Opel's styling studio in the mid-1960s, Schnell led a small design team working under a strange kind of freedom. GM's European arm had given them room to experiment, and that room came with almost no warning. Budgets stayed tight, deadlines stayed tighter, but nobody told the designers to play it safe, and that gap between tight budget and no creative limits is exactly where the GT was born. The Cadet underneath told one story: modest engine, simple suspension, nothing exotic about the bones of this car at all. But the skin wrapping around those bones told a completely different story. Long hood, low stance, a silhouette that looked like it belonged next to a Corvette rather than a family hatchback. This wasn't just badge engineering, it was sculpture built on a threadbare budget. Headlights became the real problem though, and not a small one. Round lamps fit poorly into a shape this sleek. Square ones felt dated on something meant to look futuristic. Schnell's team wanted the nose completely smooth, uninterrupted, almost aircraft-like, which meant the lights needed to disappear entirely when not in use. Nobody at Opel had built anything like that before. Few automakers anywhere had, so a small group of engineers built their own solution. Rubber-covered lamp housings, mounted on a rotating mechanism, connected to a hand crank tucked near the floor. Turn it, and the whole assembly flipped upward from horizontal to vertical in about 2 seconds. No motors, no complicated electronics. Just a clever piece of mechanical engineering, built cheap because cheap was the only budget available. One young engineer on that team later described the moment it finally worked without jamming. Relief, mostly. Nobody celebrated with champagne. They just exhaled, checked the mechanism one more time, and moved on to the next problem waiting on the list. That crank system became the car's signature. Journalists loved it. Buyers loved turning it themselves at stoplights, just to watch strangers stare. For a company known mostly for practical sedans, the GT's flip-up lamps turned Opel into something it had never quite been before, a brand people actually got excited about. Sales figures backed that excitement up almost immediately. American buyers especially couldn't get enough. Here was a genuine sports coupe silhouette, priced well below anything from Chevrolet or Porsche, wearing a badge most Americans barely recognized. Dealers struggled to keep them on lots. Magazine covers followed. For a brief stretch in the early 1970s, the Opel GT looked less like an underdog and more like a genuine success story. Nobody inside Rüsselsheim spent much time worrying about Washington. Thousands of miles away, though, a different kind of engineering was already underway. Not mechanical, but regulatory. American lawmakers had grown increasingly focused on crash safety, and bumper standards specifically had become a target. Committees met. Drafts circulated. Numbers got debated in rooms no German designer ever sat in, discussing impact speeds and structural requirements that had nothing to do with style and everything to do with survivability. Nobody at Opel read those early drafts. Why would they? The GT was selling. The mechanism worked. The shape still turned heads on every street it touched. Success has a way of making distant paperwork feel irrelevant, right up until that paperwork stops being distant. Somewhere in a Washington office, a number was being finalized, a bumper impact standard that would eventually reach every import sold in America, regardless of how well it sold or how many strangers stopped to watch its lamps flip open at a red light. By 1972, the Opel GT had become something rare, a genuine crossover hit for a brand nobody expected one from. American showrooms couldn't restock fast enough. Buyers who'd never considered a German car before found themselves drawn in by that low nose and those hidden lamps, walking out with something that felt exotic at a price that didn't. Road testers praised the handling, owners bragged about the styling. For a car built on cadet bones and a bargain bin budget, the GT had somehow outrun every low expectation placed on it. Production numbers climbed to match that momentum. Opel expanded output. Dealers requested more allocation. Everything about the GT's trajectory pointed toward a longer future, a second generation, maybe a bigger engine option, maybe even a proper successor built with a real budget instead of scraps. If you've ever rooted for something everyone else overlooked, you already know how good this moment felt. And if stories like this, where an underdog actually wins for a while, are the kind you want more of, hit subscribe now, because what happens next is the part almost nobody talks about. Because while showrooms stayed busy, Washington kept working. The bumper standard drafted years earlier had moved from proposal to policy. Starting with the 1973 model year, every car sold in America needed to withstand a low-speed impact without damage to safety equipment, headlights included. Manufacturers scrambled to comply. Some added reinforced bumpers. Some redesigned entire front ends. Big companies with big budgets absorbed the cost and adjusted. Opel didn't have that kind of budget. The GT's entire nose had been sculpted around one idea: smooth, low, uninterrupted, built specifically to let that hidden mechanism do its work without visual disruption. Reinforcing that nose to meet the new standard meant redesigning the exact feature that made the car special in the first place. Engineers who'd once celebrated solving the lamp problem now faced solving it all over again, under a deadline set by a government they'd never consulted. Money made the decision before engineering ever got the chance to. Reworking the GT's front end to meet crash standards would have cost more than the car's scrappy origins ever accounted for. GM's leadership looked at projected costs against a coupe that, however beloved, had never been a massive profit driver. The math didn't favor a redesign. It favored something simpler and far less dramatic, quietly pulling the GT from the American market rather than paying to save it. Then came the second blow, arriving almost on top of the first. Late in 1973, an oil embargo sent fuel prices climbing overnight across the country that had embraced the GT most enthusiastically. Buyers who'd once lined up for a stylish coupe suddenly cared far more about fuel economy than flip-up lamps. Sports cars across every brand felt that shift. For a car already facing regulatory extinction, the timing couldn't have landed worse. Two separate forces, arriving within months of each other, closed in on a car that had done nothing wrong. The GT hadn't failed mechanically. It hadn't lost the affection of the people who bought it. It simply existed on the wrong side of a calendar page, caught between a law it couldn't cheaply satisfy and a fuel crisis it couldn't control. Production numbers, so recently climbing, began falling instead. Dealers who'd once begged for more allocation now watched interest cool, along with gas station lines lengthening outside their windows. Nobody inside Opel needed a formal announcement to see where this was heading. The GT that had spent 5 years defying expectations was about to run out of road, not because it stopped deserving a future, but because two forces outside its control had decided it wouldn't get one. The final Opel GT rolled off the line in 1973, and almost nobody outside Rüsselsheim noticed it happen. No farewell event marked the occasion. Nobody unveiled a special edition to celebrate 5 years of a car that had genuinely surprised an industry. GM's decision had already been made, weighed, and finalized in a spreadsheet somewhere far from the styling studio where Erhard Schnell's team had once fought to make lamps disappear into a smooth German nose. The GT simply stopped, quietly, almost apologetically. American dealers sold off remaining inventory at discounts nobody had needed to offer a year earlier. Buyers who'd once competed for allocation now found showroom floors half empty, the coupe spot increasingly filled by cars built specifically to answer the two problems that had killed the GT: crash standards and fuel economy. Opel's brief moment as an American darling closed almost as fast as it had opened. For years, that seemed like the entire story. A promising coupe, undone by timing rather than talent, forgotten by most car histories that preferred cleaner narratives about mechanical failure or public rejection. Neither applied here. The GT simply ran out of runway before it ran out of appeal, but something survived that nobody expected to matter this much. That flip-up mechanism, built cheap, built fast, built to solve one narrow design problem inside a tight studio deadline, didn't disappear along with the car it was designed for. Engineers across GM's wider operations had taken notice of how well the GT's simple crank-and-rotate system worked, especially compared to the heavier, more complicated pop-up designs other manufacturers were experimenting with at the time. Patent records from the years following the GT's discontinuation show that core rotating housing concept getting refined, adapted, and eventually applied across other GM platforms entering the American market through the mid to late 1970s. The specific engineering solution born from one scrappy German studio, meant only to solve a styling problem on a car nobody expected to succeed, silently became a reference point for lamp design across an entire corporation. Think about what that actually means for a moment. A government regulation killed the car. It never touched the idea inside it. Every driver who admired a pop-up headlight on some other GM coupe through the late 1970s and into the 1980s was looking, whether they knew it or not, at a lineage that traced back to a mechanic's crank hidden under an Opel GT's hood. The car died. The engineering didn't. It simply moved on, uncredited, into badges far more famous than Opel ever became in America. Schnell's design team never received public credit for that legacy. Most of them moved on to other projects inside Opel's ongoing lineup, their names absent from the history most casual enthusiasts know today. The GT gets remembered, when it's remembered at all, as a footnote, a stylish curiosity killed by paperwork rather than a landmark that shaped an entire industry's approach to hidden lamps. That's the real injustice sitting beneath this story. Not that the GT died. Plenty of good cars die for reasons outside their control. The injustice is that almost nobody connects the dots between a scrappy, budget-built mechanism from a Rüsselsheim studio and every pop-up headlight that followed it across Detroit's biggest platforms for the next decade. Regulation ended the car. Timing ended its market. But the concept driving both, smooth, simple, mechanically honest, kept working long after the badge that birthed it stopped selling in America at all. Two forces killed the Opel GT. Neither one touched what actually made it matter. That crank under the hood, the one a mechanic once turned in 1968, it never really stopped moving. It just moved into other cars, other badges, unnoticed. The Opel GT lost its market. It never lost its influence. So which underrated legacy should we uncover next? Comment one badge below.